Video 06. Why some older people age happily and others become bitter. Part 1. The question no one dares to ask out loud. There is a question that many people ask themselves, but almost no one has the courage to ask it out loud. Why do some people reach 70 or 80 years old with that sparkle in their eyes, that seemingly inexplicable energy, that genuine joy, that quiet gratitude that overflows in every gesture? And why do others, with seemingly similar stories of the same age, sometimes with much greater material comfort, reach the same point filled with resentment, bitterness, constant complaints, and an emptiness that no achievement seems to fill? This question is uncomfortable because deep down it forces us to look at ourselves and ask, what path am I choosing now? Welcome to another video from the Wisdom of the Elderly channel. If this is your first time watching, welcome. And if you're already part of this family, thank you for being here, for trusting in this space of learning, truth, and genuine care for your lives. Today, we're going to delve into one of the most important and practical aspects of human aging. We won't be talking about supplements, diets, or exercise. We'll be talking about what truly makes the difference between aging happily and aging bitterly. And what I'm going to share with you today isn't just a philosophical reflection. It's science. It's decades of research conducted by the world's leading universities, Harvard, Stanford, the University of Chicago, on what differentiates people who age with dignity from those who age with suffering. Stay until the end, because in the last part of this video, I'm going to reveal something that could completely change the course of your life. And when I say this, I'm not exaggerating. I'm serious. Let's start with a true story. Dorothy and Margaret were neighbors for 40 years in a small town in rural Tennessee. They grew up in the same neighborhood, attended the same church, and raised their children around the same time. Today, they are both 78 years old. Dorothy wakes up every day at 6 in the morning, waters the plants, calls one of her children, takes a 30-minute walk in the park, and spends the rest of the day with the serenity of someone who has found inner peace. Margaret, on the other hand, rarely leaves the house. She spends her days reliving old grudges, arguing with her grandchildren on the phone, and feeling that the world has treated her unfairly. The same city, the same era, similar lives for decades, but radically different aging processes. What happened between them? That is precisely the question that science has been trying to answer for decades. And the answer, as we'll see today, has nothing to do with luck. It has nothing to do with money. It has nothing to do with health. It has to do with decisions, with thought patterns, with the invisible habits that accumulate over the years and that determine, with astonishing precision, who you will be at 70, 80, or 90. This should be the most liberating news you've ever heard, because if it's about freedom of choice, then you can still choose. And it's never too late. Part 2. What science has discovered about happiness in old age. In 1938, Harvard University began one of the longest studies ever conducted on human life. They followed 724 men for more than 80 years, observing their choices, relationships, mental and physical health, and quality of life until the very end. What they discovered surprised even the researchers themselves. It wasn't wealth. It wasn't prestige. Not even physical health was the main factor for those who aged happily. It was the quality of the relationships. Dr. Robert Waldinger, who is currently leading the study, said something in one of the most watched TED Talks in history that I want you to listen to very carefully. Loneliness is as lethal as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. Let it in. 15 cigarettes a day. Loneliness kills as efficiently as an addiction that everyone knows is destructive. And here's the point most people don't understand. bitterness in old age rarely stems from a single traumatic event. It arises from a pattern of gradual isolation, unresolved resentments, uncommunicated expectations, and slowly fading relationships as the person thought they would deal with it later. In psychology, this has a name: erosion of social capital. It occurs when the bonds that connect you to the people around you gradually erode, little by little, through small acts of neglect, pride, repressed resentments, and a culture that has taught that asking for help is a sign of weakness and showing need is shameful. In the American context, and this is important because this is the culture to which this content is directed, there is a curious paradox. The United States is one of the most individualistic countries in the world. Its culture highly values self-sufficiency, independence, and the "I did it my way" mentality. And that has its charm. It has its dignity. But it also comes at a high price in old age. A survey conducted by AARP, the largest advocacy organization for older adults in the United States, revealed that more than 40% of Americans over the age of 65 report feeling very lonely. 40%. In a country of 330 million people. This is not a coincidence. It is the consequence of decades of living by a philosophy that says, "I don't need anyone." But neuroscience proves otherwise. The human brain was literally designed for connection. When we're connected, our brain releases oxytocin, the bonding hormone, which reduces cortisol, the stress hormone, improves immune function, decreases systemic inflammation, and even slows cellular aging. In other words, having people you love and who love you isn't an emotional luxury. It's medicine. And the absence of that, the bitterness, the isolation, the resentment, is not just sad. It's literally disgusting. Researchers at the University of Chicago have discovered that people who suffer from chronic loneliness have levels of inflammation in their blood comparable to those of people with serious autoimmune diseases. The body reacts to loneliness as if it were under constant attack. Now, the practical question is, why do some people reach old age surrounded by love and affection, while others do so alone and bitter? The answer has 5 levels, and we're going to explore each one of them. Part 3: The 5 Roots of Bitterness. After decades of research in positive psychology, gerontology, and behavioral neuroscience, scientists have identified recurring patterns in people who age with bitterness. These are not coincidences, but rather underlying issues. And these underlying issues, when identified early, can be eradicated. The first fundamental cause is the accumulation of unresolved resentments. There is a psychological mechanism called rumination. It occurs when the mind repeatedly returns to painful events from the past, not to learn from them, but to relive them, reinforce them, and build a victim identity around them. The person who ruminates doesn't suffer because of what happened, but because of what they choose to relive. Over time, this rumination becomes so automatic that the person doesn't even realize they're doing it. It becomes a background state, a nuance that permeates everything. Psychologist Martin Seligman, from the University of Pennsylvania and founder of positive psychology, discovered that people with a high rate of rumination are significantly more likely to develop depression, chronic anxiety, and heart problems. And these conditions, combined, create the perfect environment for a bitter old age. The second root is inflexibility. The world changes. Families change. Children grow up and build their own lives. Social values transform. Technology advances at breakneck speed. And in the face of all this, there is a type of person who decides at some point to stop adapting. Things were better before. Nobody respects anyone anymore. The world's gone to hell. Have you heard these phrases before? Maybe you've even said them yourself. This pattern, which psychologists call cognitive rigidity, does not mean that the world is worse, but rather that there is a refusal to find value and meaning in the new forms that the world takes. And this refusal comes at a very high price in old age. Because children stop calling as often, not for lack of affection, but for lack of energy to maintain conversations that always end in criticism. Grandchildren drift away, the social circle shrinks, and the person feels increasingly alone, increasingly convinced that the world is wrong, and increasingly unable to perceive that loneliness is, in part, of their own making. The third root is the identity built solely around work or social role. In the United States, perhaps more than anywhere else in the world, the question, "What do you do?" is often synonymous with, "Who are you?" Work is not just a means of support. It's identity, it's purpose, it's status. It's the answer to, "Why do I get up in the morning?" And then retirement arrives. And suddenly that identity vanishes. The person wakes up and no longer knows who they are. They no longer know their purpose. They no longer have meetings, goals, responsibilities, or colleagues who depend on them. Researchers at Stanford University have documented what they call a retirement identity crisis. A post-retirement identity crisis. It most severely affects people whose self-esteem was almost entirely tied to their professional careers. And when this crisis is not resolved, over the years it transforms into resentment, emptiness, and ultimately, bitterness. The fourth root is the absence of a renewed purpose. Viktor Frankl, the Austrian psychiatrist who survived the Nazi concentration camps and wrote Man's Search for Meaning, said something that has never ceased to be true. He who has a why to live can bear almost any how. People who age happily, without exception, have a purpose. It might be caring for their grandchildren, tending a garden, a religious community, volunteering, teaching, or an art they've always wanted to explore. But there's something more. There's a why that gives meaning to each day. Those who grow old with bitterness often haven't found renewed purpose. They expected life to provide it automatically. And when it didn't, the resulting emptiness was filled with complaints, comparisons, and a constant focus on the past. The fifth root, and perhaps the most silent of all, is the inability to forgive. I'm not talking about forgiving in the sense of absolving the other person. I'm talking about forgiving in the sense of freeing yourself, of letting go of the burden you carry when you continue to harbor anger toward people who, often, don't even know you're still thinking about them. Johns Hopkins University has conducted studies demonstrating that genuine forgiveness is associated with significant reductions in cortisol levels, blood pressure, and cardiovascular risk. People who practice forgiveness not as a weakness, but as a form of emotional hygiene, live longer and enjoy a better quality of life. And those who cannot forgive carry that burden for decades, until it becomes part of their being. Until resentment ceases to be a reaction to what happened and transforms into a trait of their personality. These five roots, rumination, rigidity, fragmented identity, lack of purpose, and inability to forgive, are the pillars of bitterness in old age. But there's another side to the story, and that's what we're going to talk about now. Part 4. The 5 pillars of lasting happiness. While there are roots of bitterness, there are also pillars of happiness. And the good news, the one I want you to remember from this video, is that these pillars can be built at any stage of life. Even now, even today. The first pillar is active gratitude. I'm not talking about forced optimism. I'm not asking you to ignore pain, loss, or the real difficulties of life. I'm talking about a deliberate and scientifically documented practice that literally reconfigures the brain's neural circuitry. Dr. Breen Brown, a researcher at the University of Houston and one of the most respected voices in the field of emotional well-being in the United States, spent years interviewing people she described as deeply joyful. And she discovered something surprising. They all actively and consciously practiced gratitude. It wasn't that they had more reasons to be grateful, but rather that they chose to focus on the reasons that already existed. Studies conducted by UCLA have shown that writing down 3 things you are grateful for each day, for just 3 weeks, produces measurable changes in the activity of the prefrontal cortex, the brain region associated with well-being, healthy decision-making, and emotional regulation. 3 weeks, 3 things a day. The brain begins to change. The second pillar is the active maintenance of connections. There's something no one tells you. Deep friendships in old age don't arise spontaneously. They are cultivated, with intention, with effort, with the humility to take the first step even when the other person hasn't. People who age happily don't wait for others to call them. They call, they write, they make their presence known. They create rituals of connection. A Sunday coffee with an old friend, a weekly call with a child who lives in another state, a handwritten letter to a grandchild who barely has time to reply to messages. And you know what happens? The grandson answers. The son calls again. The old friend shows up for the next coffee. Because a connection, when offered sincerely and without demands, is usually reciprocated. The third pillar is the reinvention of identity. You are not just what you have done for 40 years. You are also what you will continue to do, what you will continue to learn, what you will continue to create. Discover the story of Frank Lloyd Wright, the greatest American architect of all time. He designed the Guggenheim Museum in New York at the age of 91. At 91 years old, discover the story of Grandma Moses, Anna Mary Robertson Moses, who began painting at age 78 after arthritis prevented her from embroidering. She became one of the most celebrated American artists of the 20th century. And learn the story of Colonel Harlan Sanders, who founded Kentucky Fried Chicken at age 62. After his retirement left him with little more than a chicken recipe and a refusal to accept that his story was over. Reinvention is not a denial of age. It is respect for human capacity, which has no expiration date. The fourth pillar consists of cultivating a purpose that transcends the self. A Blue Zones Project investigation, led by author Dan Buettner, which identified the regions of the world where people live longer and better lives, found that in all the blue zones, the longest living and happiest older people had something in common. They served something bigger than themselves. In Okinawa, Japan, there is a concept called ikigai, one's reason for being. In Sardinia, the elderly are the cultural pillars of the community. In Loma Linda, California, the only blue zone in the United States, Seventh-day Adventists share a life of service, community, and spiritual purpose. A purpose that transcends oneself, whether it be faith, family, community, art, or nature, is the most powerful antidote to the emptiness of old age. The fifth pillar is the practice of forgiveness as a form of spiritual hygiene. Imagine you're carrying a backpack, and inside that backpack, over the decades, you've been placing stones. Every wound, a stone. Every unresolved betrayal, a stone. Every unfulfilled expectation you never expressed, a stone. Now imagine carrying that backpack with you for 30 or 40 years. Forgiveness doesn't mean removing stones from the ground. It simply means taking off your backpack. It means saying, "This happened. It was real. It hurt. And I choose not to carry it anymore." Not because the other person deserves it, but because you deserve to live lightly. This decision, which may seem insignificant, has a quantifiable impact on physical health, longevity, and quality of life in old age. This is science, not mere folk wisdom. Part 5. The Turning Point. When is it too late? Never. I want to tell you about a man named George. George spent most of his life as an executive at a manufacturing company in Ohio. He worked hard, supported his family, and was disciplined and serious. But he was also distant. He wasn't very affectionate. He wasn't very present. Business trips, meetings, reports. His children grew up feeling his absence even when he was home. At 68, George retired, and the emptiness he felt was devastating. Without a job, he didn't know who he was. Without meetings, he didn't know how to fill his time. And his family, who so longed for him to be more present, now found him bitter, critical, and difficult to bear. At 72, George suffered a mild heart attack. It wasn't serious, but it was enough to scare him. And there, in that hospital bed, with his eldest daughter by his side holding his hand, he asked a question he had avoided all his life. What did I do wrong? The daughter could have stayed silent. She could have said, "Nothing, Dad," but she loved him too much to lie. And she said, gently and lovingly, "You were never really here, Dad, not even when you were." That day, George cried like he hadn't cried since he was a child. And then, at 72, he started again. He started calling his children for no apparent reason. He started attending his grandchildren's games. He started apologizing, not in a general way, but specifically naming everything he had done that he regretted. He started learning to garden with the wife he had neglected for decades. He started attending a veterans group in his city, where he found, for the first time in his adult life, genuine male friendships. When George died at 84, his funeral was packed. And the people who came weren't there out of obligation. They were there because, in those last 12 years, he had become the person he always had the potential to be. It's never too late. And I say this based on science, not just hope. The adult brain, even the aging brain, possesses what neuroscientists call neuroplasticity, the ability to form new circuits, new patterns, and new emotional responses. It's not the exuberant neuroplasticity of a 5-year-old, but it is real, powerful, and activated precisely through the practices we've discussed today. Gratitude, connection, purpose, and forgiveness. Dr. Ellen Langer, a professor of psychology at Harvard and a pioneer in studies on aging and mental health, conducted a famous experiment in the 1980s called the counterclockwise study. In this study, she had men between the ages of 70 and 80 live for a week in an environment that recreated the atmosphere of 20 years earlier. By the end of the week, these men had improved their vision, hearing, grip strength, walking speed, and cognitive function, simply by being placed in a different mental state. What you believe about your own life directly affects how your body behaves. This isn't just cheap motivation. It's neurobiology. You can still choose who you're going to be. The question isn't, is it too late? The question is, am I willing to begin? Part 6, the plan for the next 30 days. I don't want this video to simply leave you inspired. Inspiration without action is just emotional entertainment. I want you to leave with a concrete action plan. Here's a 30-day plan based on the research we discussed today. Simple enough to start tomorrow, yet effective enough to change the course of the rest of your life. During the first week, the focus is on gratitude. Each night before bed, write down, not just mentally, but actually 3 things you are grateful for that day. It doesn't have to be anything significant. Could be breakfast, the sunshine, or a good conversation. The act of writing activates different brain circuits than simply thinking. Do this for 7 consecutive days. In the second week, the focus shifts to connection. Choose 3 people you've grown distant from, whether due to distance, resentment, or simply a lack of time, and reach out to them. Not to resolve conflicts, not to demand anything, simply to say, "Thinking of you. How are you?" 3 people. A call, a message, a visit, and observe what happens. In the third week, the focus shifts to purpose. Sit down with a piece of paper and write down the answers to 3 questions. What do I want to continue learning? What can I offer that no one else can offer in the same way? Who does my presence make a difference to? The answers to these 3 questions are the roadmap for your renewed purpose. In the fourth week, the focus is on letting go. Think of one person, just one, you still hold a grudge against. You don't need to call them. You don't need to write a letter you'll never send. Simply sit quietly and say to yourself, aloud or silently, "I choose not to carry this burden anymore. Not for you, for me." And notice how your body reacts. 30 days. For training sessions, 1 per week. It's not a promise that everything will change. It's a promise that you'll start to change. And sometimes starting is all it takes. I want to conclude with one last thought. At some point in life, and for many of you watching, that moment may have already arrived. You look back and realize you've traveled further than you have ahead of you. And that can be terrifying, or it can be liberating. It can be liberating because it means you've already proven yourself enough. You've already worked hard enough. You've already fought hard enough. What remains doesn't have to be effort. Can be presence. Can be love. Can be lightness. Dorothy, the Tennessee neighbor I mentioned at the beginning of this video, has a habit she's maintained for 40 years. Every Sunday night, she writes a line in an old notebook, just one line about the day. It doesn't have to be profound. It doesn't have to be beautiful, but it has to be true. She was once asked what the secret to her happiness was. She reflected for a moment and replied, "I stopped talking to my past self, who only wants to remind me of what went wrong, and I start listening to my past self, who still believes that tomorrow can be good." This is the option available to you today, right now, not tomorrow, now. If this video touched you, made you reflect, reminded you of someone, or inspired you to start over, I ask you to do one thing. Share it. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. A friend, a family member, someone you know who is dealing with resentment and may not know there is another way. And if you haven't subscribed to this channel yet, do it now. Because all the content we produce here has a single purpose: to help you live longer, better, and with the dignity you deserve. This is the Wisdom of the Elders channel. Until the next video.